Looking through your outline, I saw some really good stuff that, I'd like to kind of learn more about. And it's kind of right on target with some of the things we've been talking about, implementing both with our high school, but also, I guess, thinking about how we could implement it with our youth programs a little more to develop some stronger throwers.
Okay. Yep. This is actually just something I just covered with West Madison Little League a little bit ago. So I don't know if everybody has access to what I sent you, Lucas, or if they'll get access to it later.
So I posted it in the chat.
Okay.
So if you want to check it out, I can probably also figure out how to. Do you want me to have it up shared as well?
Let's start by going through those pitch grips. If you want to pull through those, because I want to start off with the 4-seam grip and stuff, because this is usually where it breaks down first. Do you have there we go. Perfect. So so those of you that are on the call and you don't know this, this is my passion. Okay, I was a catcher playing. Obviously, you coach long enough, you coach different positions, but pitching, throwing is my passion. It always has been. And I always tell people it has been because I never had a day in my baseball career where my arm didn't hurt. And I felt like I had some pretty darn good coaches. But it became an obsession of mine as a young coach to put my players in a position where that didn't happen and figure out why for me. And, I'm 51 years old and I finally figured it out. I can throw batting practice forever, a day after a day, and my arm doesn't hurt. So it would have been nice to have when I was playing. So it all starts kind of with that. The other thing I will say is there's some things that I like data. I like new stuff. I love to learn all the time. But there's very much, I'm a common sense person in some things. And if it doesn't pass the smell test, it probably isn't something that I'm going to run with. So a couple things there. And anybody that knows me and has been to any of my clinics knows that, I can get as technical as anybody wants to, but it doesn't always translate to the field. So with that all being said, let's take a look at these pitch grips and let's focus on our 4-seam fastball grip. So we're talking about pitching, but really, guys, what we're talking about is throwing. And we forget that. If you don't have a strong, accurate thrower, you don't have a pitcher. So we just talked, Coach, you just shared a story about Lucas throwing a no-hitter at Memorial. You made it very clear that Lucas was a catcher, okay? And Lucas, you could hit, but the first time I saw you, what stood out behind the plate is the ball came out of your hand clean. You threw the ball accurately and you threw it well. Your pitchers, it wasn't like you were throwing it back shotgun. They were reaching for it all over the place, and that translates to the mound. And that's an important thing that we understand. Sometimes we skip and we say, I'm going to turn this kid into a pitcher, and we haven't even taken the time to turn him into a thrower. Develop the throwing athlete first, and they'll figure out how to pitch. I'm a firm believer in that. And we've seen that play out. I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of professional players, and I think people would be shocked how many third basemen, catchers, right fielders have been converted to pitching to keep their professional career alive. Because they were great throwers, the bat didn't develop, and putting them on the mound was pretty easy because somebody that knew what the heck they were doing just had to teach them an off-speed pitch or two. So that's important. It starts with this 4-seam grip. Okay, and I'm going to just point out a couple of things that are common flaws that we don't pay attention to, and these have to do with the laws of physics. So if I'm saying I want somebody to be a great thrower, what I'm saying is I need to put them in a position where the baseball stays in flight on a line as long as possible. Okay? Physics affect that. So to do that, I'm fighting gravity, I'm fighting wind forces, I'm fighting friction against the seams of the baseball, and so on. Okay, moisture, again, you can get as technical as you want with things, okay? But the bottom line is I'm fighting forces of physics to try and keep the ball in flight. So if you look at his fingers, the first thing we see is we see that the middle finger and the thumb are dissecting the baseball. They're cutting the ball in half. This is where most kids break down. I need to have equal pressure on the top of the baseball and on the bottom of the baseball if I want it to stay in flight. So if I take that thumb and take that middle picture and I move that thumb up from the very bottom of the ball and I move it more to the midline of the baseball, one, I'd be teaching somebody to throw a sinker, but that's how most kids are going to grab the baseball. The thumb is going to be up off the ball a little bit, and I did not bring a ball in here. I'm going to go probably grab one in a second when I take a breath. They are going to take their thumb and they're going to hold it off to the side so that their index finger and their thumb actually are the pressure point. Well, there's two things we know about that. One, I can't get pressure on the bottom of the baseball, so the ball wants to sink. Again, I mentioned that's how you teach a sinker. Two, we know that the way the arm is made, when I move that thumb up off of the horizon at all, I've increased the pressure applied to the elbow, the inner part of the elbow, the UCL area. So there's a saying in professional baseball, when the pitching coach comes walking up to you and he says, your arm's getting a little bit old, we're going to teach you the sinker and teach you to be a sinker ball pitcher. The next person that comes up is the team physician to schedule elbow surgery. Okay? So, and Kevin Brown, if you, the old timers on the call, remember Kevin Brown started out Major League Baseball. He lived between 98 and 102 miles an hour, had one of the best arms of the time. He hurt his arm. He was a pie slinger. And after his first arm surgery, he turned into a sinker ball pitcher, probably the best power sinker ever in the history of the game. 97, 98 miles an hour and able to put it on a right-hander's back ankle. He had multiple UCL surgeries in his career. And interviews with him, he knew that was coming. He had said, I was a big, strong guy. Every time I released the ball, that could be the moment I needed to replace that ligament. I could feel it. And so we know by elevating that thumb, we're putting our throwing athlete in a weaker position. And also, we're not providing them an opportunity to throw the ball on a line with velocity. So that's a key component that as a coach, we have to watch. Is my thrower getting his thumb underneath the ball? Lucas, you had talked about youth development, okay? I would rather have 3 fingers on the top of that ball and the thumb directly underneath for a little kid so they get the feel for the middle finger and the thumb working together than I would be concerned with them holding the ball with 2 fingers. Because if I'm concerned with that little kid holding the ball with 2 fingers, that thumb's coming up every single time. The other way you can cheat it in the development with young kids is to take the 2-seam fastball below and turn the ball so that they're putting their 2 fingers across the thin part. And if you think about it, I'm actually, you know what? I'm going to be right back because I am going to grab a baseball. Hold on.
I had to go grab a ball too. Good to see you, John.
Yeah, I have no idea how to do this on my phone. So
I had one in my glove, and I didn't. My glove was empty. So if I take the baseball and I turn it so that my fingers are on top that way, okay? My thumb now is right between the 2 red seams, right? So this is an easy teach for a small kid. What I tell kids when they come to our pitching camp or our throwing camps is I tell them, your thumb's a horse. The horse doesn't get to leave the stable. Put the horse in the stall, park your bike, park your car in the garage right there, and it's got to stay there. And I can walk up to them, and if they're like this, hey, where's your horse supposed to be? Oh, I got to get in the stable. Where's your car supposed to be? I got to get in the stable. Okay, or I got to get in the garage. But I want them to get the feel of that middle thumb or that middle finger and that thumb working together. And then as they get older, the hand grows, I start working on the perception that the ball hasn't grown just because you're grabbing it with 4 seams. It's the same size. It just feels weird. Does that make sense when we're talking about grip and little kids and above? The next mistake is, notice in that middle picture, the fingers are flat on the ball. Okay, most little kids, even high schoolers, you're gonna see this. See that gap underneath there? Almost like there's fangs kind of sticking into the ball. An exaggerated version would be like that, okay? That creates a stiff wrist. Well, that's one of the first elements to creating a changeup is a stiff wrist. So I'm gonna create a lot of frustration with a kid if they choke the ball back in their hand, or they're worried about getting their fingertips right on top of the seams, because the wrist is gonna lock up and that ball's not gonna carry, it's gonna die. They're taking away this snap. And that snap, how important is it? In pitching, we call it the last 5%. Okay? The pitchers that get it, when we put a radar gun on pitchers, guys, just to give you a sense of it, a pitcher that finishes and snaps through, as opposed to a pitcher that's stiff-wristed, that's anywhere from 2 to 4 miles an hour of velocity gained or lost. Snapping the wrist can add as much as 4 miles an hour to a fastball. And I'm not even talking about the rotation you're creating on the ball. You know, you hear everything with Rapsodo and everything like that. A guy that snaps the wrist is going to increase the RPMs considerably compared to somebody else. Okay, so that's a critical component, is them laying the fingers across the ball and creating that nice loose wrist so they can snap through and pronate, turn thumbs down when they throw. Supinate is thumb up, pronate is thumb down when they're throwing the ball. The other thing I want to point out is where their finger pads actually are. And you can see it best on the picture top right. Look how deep the seams actually are on that top right picture for his fingers. He's actually taking the first knuckle on the top of his hand and he's laying that first knuckle of his middle finger over the seam. Most kids, again, will slide that ball up so that the finger pad is just barely on the seam. And they think that feels like it gives them a good grip, okay? So in high school, in Wisconsin in the spring, you know, we're lucky if we get a dry day. When I actually throw this baseball, if I'm holding it that way, I'm actually pulling through the slick part of the ball. If I put the ball back so that my top knuckle is sitting on top of the seam, now I'm pulling through the seam as that ball leaves my hand. And if you put a baseball in your hand and play around with that, it's not holding it any deeper. It's just the way I rotate the ball. I want it rotated so that my middle finger, top knuckle is right on top of the seam, which allows my middle finger to pull, creating friction, right? So we all know of pitchers, or we've heard of pitchers that get the blood blister off of the middle finger, okay? The only way I can get that is if I'm getting that ripping through that seam. It's the only way that happens. If I'm on top of it and I'm sliding through the slick part of the ball, I'm not going to get that. That gives me more spin. The tighter the spin, from a throwing athlete standpoint, the longer the ball stays in the air, can fight friction. From a pitcher standpoint, the tighter the spin on a four-seam fastball, the faster the perception of velocity is. And we won't get into the technical pieces of setting hitters up and stuff, but I will say this. Hitters, this is a really important thing for pitching coaches to understand, and for pitchers more importantly. Hitters do not hit what we throw at them. Hitters hit what they think they see. And if it was the other way around, Trevor Hoffman would not have had a successful career, because every hitter that Trevor Hoffman ever pitched against knew the changeup was coming, but every hitter's brain told them it was a 90-mile-an-hour fastball. They swing, they commit to what they think they see, not what we throw at them. And that's why you see Rapsodo and different things like that, and all the, at the professional level, not only is velocity being preached, but rotation is being preached, because the tighter I can rotate a baseball, the more I can convince the brain or confuse the brain of the hitter, okay? one of the things when we're talking about pitching, and we talk about this a little bit, something to understand in terms of visual cues. And we talk about how the eyes work. If you go out to the highway sometimes, guys, go out wherever you want where traffic's going 60 miles an hour and watch the white cars go by versus the colored cars. And pick out 2 spots ahead of you where you have to play. You've all played the baseball game with a stopwatch, right? Play the baseball game with a stopwatch and try and click it when the car gets to a certain point ahead. The white cars, you'll find it very difficult to hit the exact time. You'll be delayed a little bit. With colored cars, you'll nail it almost every time. Red will be the one that you nail almost every time. The baseball's white and red. The more we can produce white on the ball, the harder it is for a hitter to react. The best pitch in baseball is a 4-seam fastball. Every hitter will tell you, give me a good 4-seam fastball that has tight rotation, and that's going to be the hardest one for me to figure out how to get the bat on. Throw me a 2-seamer, no matter how much velocity, if it doesn't have movement, I'm going to hit it. In Major League Baseball, the 2 pitches that get hit for home runs the most are sliders and 2-seam fastballs. Sliders, because there's a nice pretty red dot inviting the hitter to square it up. They get hung, they get timed. 2-seam fastballs, you hang it, I see a lot of red, it's easy to time. Mess a 4-seam fastball up upstairs to a major league hitter, you get a lot of swing and misses. Very hard to time a high, good 4-seam fastball with rotation. So just a side note on that. So we start with the concept of teaching them, any throwing athlete, how to correctly throw a 4-seam fastball, and then everything comes off of that at a quarter turn or what they're going to do, and we're going to develop a pitch repertoire off of that. Lucas, we could kind of, are there questions on that piece of it? Okay. I can't stress enough, that's really where it has to start. Okay. We're going to come back to developing those throwers. While we've got this up, we might as well go through some pitch grips and look at things here. The 2-seamers, I'll give a couple notes on a couple of things here. Be careful on the 2-seamers. The way to get good movement on a 2-seamer is to elevate the thumb. Again, you put your throwing athlete in arm in jeopardy by doing that. Notice where the finger pressure is on the 2-seamer. He's actually not on top of the seams. He's actually inside the seams. That's a common mistake. A lot of people try to develop the 2-seam fastball by putting both fingers on top of the seams. We actually want the middle finger on the inside. The index finger can be on top, but we want the middle finger on the in. If you look at every baseball, there's actually 4 seams, right? It's not one solid seam. It's 2 stitches and then 2 stitches on the other side. So the middle finger wants to press the inside stitch. The index finger can be on top, but that's going to create that movement. Some guys like to put the index finger on the inside and the middle on top to create that little finger pressure. If the kids you're working with have weak hands, if they can't shake your hand firmly, Bill, you probably will understand this more than the younger guys on the call because we've seen this more and more, right? Now it's harder for pitchers, I have found, to create true late movement because they just don't have the hand strength in high school anymore. They don't do physical manual labor as much anymore. They don't use their hands. They push a lot of weight. They're really strong kids, but this part of their body is not as strong as it used to be back in the day. And so when you look at pitchers way back when, they can manipulate the ball very easily with their fingers just because of their hand strength. I'll talk about that more when we get into breaking balls, but that's important to understand. The other thing I tell kids is when we're working on a 2-seamer, if your 2-seamer isn't consistently moving down and late, it's not a pitch for a kid to throw. Just take it away from them immediately. Because again, it is the easiest pitch to square up from the fastball standpoint because it's red. So if they're not getting down arm action movement to their 2-seamer, they're not throwing a 2-seamer. The other question I get asked is, what if I'm getting action away from arm side on a 2-seamer? Now he's cutting the ball, he's doing something incorrect. You're probably going to be looking at an elbow issue, a forearm issue later on. So probably stick with a 4-seamer with that kid. Changeup, all kinds of changeup grips here. This is kind of a fun one. You could teach the different types of changeups, but I'm going to challenge you guys to just, again, let's have a physics lesson. If I'm going to throw a fastball, I'm not touching very much of the ball. I've got 3 points of contact, my thumb and my 2 fingers. I'm using the seams to create spin. I want a loose wrist so that I could get carry. So if I take away any of those things that create velocity, I'm creating a changeup, right? Make sense? Because I want a changeup to go slow. I want a changeup to sink. So if I want the changeup to be the opposite of my fastball. So if you get the wrist to stiffen up, any grip that stiffens the wrist is going to take a little bit of velocity off the ball. If you have more touch points on the ball is going to come out of the hand slower because there's more friction being created. If you remove the seams from the equation, so you're not generating velocity or spin with the seams, the ball's going to come out of your hand slower. If you can do all of those things, you become Trevor Hoffman. So you can see a few different changeups here. We've got the pitchfork changeup on the top there. Notice the thumb is underneath. That helps guys control the ball. That is the most basic changeup because it feels like a fastball. You take it from that grip there, and then step 2 for that would be to turn the ball a little bit more in the hand. So he's actually got the seams underneath his big knuckles. So now he's throwing the slick part of the ball. Still going to come out like a 4-seam fastball, but I can't create any spin. I can't create any speed on it. When I talk to kids about throwing this changeup, I tell them it should feel like you grabbed a water balloon and you're trying to throw a water balloon as fast as you can, and it's not going to go anywhere. And there's nothing to grab onto. The changeup below is a circle change. And the whole reason for the circle is very simply to lock the wrist. That's its only job. If you put your hand in that circle position, the wrist immediately becomes stiff. And so we naturally pronate, go thumbs down, and that's going to create some movement for a kid. But because the wrist is stiff, I can't get that snap. So I'm immediately removing 2 to 4 miles an hour without doing anything else. And there's tons of ways to modify that. Okay, there's Fosh changeups where you split the grip between the 2 fingers. There's a split finger fastball. There's a palm ball. There's all kinds of ways, but any changeup is simply trying to take those velocity factors away. Retard the wrist movement, take away spin with seams, more touch points on the ball. All of those are going to reduce velocity. What I like to do for your younger guys, I'm very big on little kids, little leaguers should be learning 4-seam fastball and changeup. And I don't overteach them. I overteach the 4-seam fastball. The changeup, I let kids be creative. And I tell them, I want to touch as much of the ball as you want. Don't use the seams. And I want you to play long toss with it. I want you to get out to 100 feet and throw it as hard as you can. And just keep messing around with the grip until you feel comfortable with it. But it can't be the same grip as your 4-seam fastball. It's got to involve more fingers, stuff like that. And I might show them a grip or 2, but let them have fun with it. When you do that, you're increasing their athleticism, you're increasing their feel for the baseball, and you're allowing them to be a little creative and have ownership. And show me any little kid that you don't give ownership to that's not going to all of a sudden think that pitch is really cool because he created it. Hell, you could even name it after him. I've never seen that change up before. That's a Jimmy Smith ball from now on. I mean, and they truly have more fun with it than being able to try and throw it. So when you're looking at the younger kids, those are the two pitches that I emphasize. In our pitching camps with young guys, we won't start with a 2-seam fastball until a guy starts to approach junior high, freshman year in high school. Then we'll start talking about the 2-seamer. But before that, we're focusing on 4-seam fastballs and changeups because I want feel, and both of those pitches are gonna help them develop arm strength. You have to throw the ball hard to throw a good changeup. It's one of the few pitches you throw with 100% arm speed. Changeups and curveballs are thrown with 100% arm speed. Fastballs, we want a pitcher to live what we call pitchability. We want a pitcher to live at about 90 to 95% of velocity with his fastball. We rarely want a pitcher to max out on his fastball on the mound unless he's got it. We want that extra gear for him to have at some point. But a changeup has to be thrown at 100% arm speed. Otherwise, the hitter we don't get the deception. So it's a great way to develop arm strength. I'll pause for a second, let anybody ask questions on those before we kind of look at some of the other pitches.
On the changeup, how much do you value that it has the same look as the fastball in terms of seams?
Yep, a lot. At our level, you want it to look the same. If I'm primarily a four-seam fastball pitcher, which again, if we're talking about developing younger kids, right, they're going to be, then I want my changeup to look like a four-seam fastball. And now also, Lucas, go back to what I said earlier. The hardest ball for the brain to recognize is a white ball. And so if I really want to fool the hitter, if I can throw my changeup off a four-seam grip, then I'm going to get more white and less red. So I'm making it that much tougher for the hitter to identify distance from the plate.
I think that idea is something I hadn't really thought of too much, because I think a lot of times pitchers, they like their changeup that moves a little more.
Yep.
So they'll go to the two-seam kind of grip because it moves a little more. But if they're primarily throwing the four-seam fastball, it doesn't look like their fastball as much.
Right. And that's something as a coach you have to decide. I've got a kid in my program right now. He throws primarily four-seam fastballs. He's got a really good feel, and this gets into pitch repertoire. Your pitches need to work off of each other. He throws a true 12-6 breaking ball. So he needs to throw a four-seam fastball. He's got to be able to elevate his fastball. A two-seamer's not going to do him any good. It needs to come out of the same window. However, he throws a really, really good circle change that he throws off a two-seam grip, and the bottom sinks out, and he'll break your back toe with it. So in that case, because of his feel, I'm not going to change him to a four-seam grip on that, because there's hardly ever a day he comes to the park where that changeup's not going down hard for him. And so I'm not concerned about it, right? But if he doesn't get that kind of movement, if it was just a velocity change difference, now we got to make an adjustment, because now he's just throwing a slow fastball to the hitter. And with aluminum bats, I mean, they're not loaded like they were when you and John played, yeah. But with aluminum bats now, though, it's still, I mean, a hitter doesn't have to have perfect timing to be able to put something good enough on it.
So, Coach, which of the change-up grips would you say is the, I don't want to say easiest, but the first one that you would teach, and before you give them that creative license to do?
The easiest one is the pitchfork. That one in the middle there where you see the three fingers, thumb underneath. And then I would teach it that way, and I would just slowly start rotating the ball until I got the seams underneath the big knuckles. Right underneath those big knuckles there, because now there's no seams to pull on. You first want to give them a feel with the thumb under and having the seams. So it's just basically throwing like they threw maybe when they first were in T-ball, right? Three fingers on top, thumb and pinky underneath. Then I'm going to turn the ball, just rotate it back in their hand. So now there's not really any seams to grab onto. And then the third development with the pitchfork change is squeezing the pinky and the thumb together, because that just tightens the wrist a little bit more. Makes it just a little stiffer. And if you hold that ball, Lucas, and you just put your thumb underneath with your pinky and just kind of press them together, you feel that strain all of a sudden down into your wrist?
Yeah.
Really hard to get any snap now. That's tough to do until their hands start to get mature, because you got to have fairly long fingers to keep it out there. The other thing I would do is take that one and just move it back in their hand, not quite a palm ball, but I want to feel back in here, the pads of their fingers, on their palm here, feeling it up against the ball, just moving it back in the hand a little bit more also slows it down. So that's another developmental way to take the pitchfork forward. The circle change is a fad pitch. You have to have long fingers to throw it effectively and get movement. you have to commit to it and throw it a lot. So it looks cool. Kids think it's cool. All of that. I can probably count on two hands the circle changes that I've ever coached that are like legitimately, that's a pitch that'll get a hitter out. Most of them are, yeah, show them you have it. But if it's not going to be a go-to for you if you got to get an out with a guy on third base. And you can see some of the other grips. That next one, we typically call that a fosh. We're just splitting the grip on the fingers. We're creating different pressure points again, covering the ball a little more. Also a very easy one to throw because it's literally, I'm picking it up off a table. And you can throw it off of 4 seams, 2 seams. Again, the commonality you're seeing here is everything's being thrown off of 4 seams because the understanding is the 4-seam fastball. The white is harder to see for the hitter. When we get into sliders and curveballs, I'm not going to cover these a ton unless you have questions on them. But I will say in terms of development, as I had started saying before, we don't even have these discussions, like for instance, in our pitching camps until guys start to get about their sophomore and junior year in high school. And there's a couple reasons. One, if I teach somebody to throw a good curveball, hitters aren't good enough to hit a curveball at the high school level, and certainly not in the junior high level. So what am I going to throw all the time if I'm the pitcher? I'm not helping that kid's development now. I'm not going to increase arm strength if I'm throwing curveballs all the time. Nobody long tosses with a curveball. And so there's that mental piece of it because they want to be successful on the mound. They're going to go to what works. The second piece is we have to understand that breaking balls have nothing to do with our arm. They have everything to do with our fingers. And so there's a certain amount of strength the kid has to be able to throw breaking balls in a healthy way without compromising the elbow or the back of the shoulder. A simple test that I'll do with kids is I'll have them take, I'll move my computer up here just a little bit. I'll have them take a ball just like this and pop it in the air with 2 fingers. So they're using their thumb and their middle finger, and they're just starting at their waist and snapping the ball up in the air. And you'd be amazed at how many kids you'll come across that can't do that. They can't create enough strength to even do that with the baseball. If I can't do that with the baseball, I can't dominate the top of the ball with my middle finger and throw an actual curveball that will play at the collegiate and beyond that level. I have to take it, and I have to take it behind my head, and I have to create this fishing action to try and throw it. And that action is going to result in me having arm problems. Guys, and John, Lucas, you know this, as hitters, it takes literally 2 at-bats for the guy that had the quote good curveball for the good hitters to come back to the dugout and go, fastballs from here, curveballs from behind the head. And now it's just, we just sit and wait for it to be elevated, and it's just a matter of how far it gets hit. Right? And it just takes that one time through the lineup for good hitters to say, dude, you got me the first time because it's good. It's got good movement. But once I recognize the difference behind your head, now I'm just looking elevated. So it plays out, even in terms of getting hitters out. The other thing that two other things I'll say about breaking pitches that are common mistakes in terms of coaching is your pitchers need to understand that the curveball mimics arm slot. So the only person on your pitching staff that has a 12-6 curveball is the one guy that throws straight over the top. If I'm a 3/4 arm pitcher, my curveball should be 11-5, 10-4. It should not be 12-6, because if I'm releasing out here my fastball, I have to come up here to throw a 12-6 curveball. I have to change my release point. I'm not coming out of the same window. And I may be able to get guys out at the younger level, but if that kid wants to progress on, if the ball's not coming out of the same window, he's not going to progress on. And he's putting himself in jeopardy of hurting himself because there's a reason he throws from that window. That's where his body's comfortable. That's where he's the most efficient. That's where he does his most damage. As soon as he changes, he jeopardizes his health. So that's an important thing to understand because your kid's here 12-6 and they're thinking clock 12-6 and not mimic your arm slot. So wherever their arm slot is, if they're throwing a true curveball, that's what they want. The other thing with the curveball is we don't want to see a hump in the curveball. Kids will fool themselves and they think, oh, I throw a great curveball. I got a big hump in it. And look how much it breaks. That curveball broke 4 feet. Okay. That plays in Little League. It doesn't play much beyond. We want the curveball to be flat. And I tell kids this, if you're sitting at the dinner table, the curveball should be coming down the table and roll right into your lap. It shouldn't come from the chandelier over the dinner table and fall into your lap. It should be rolling right down the table and falling into your lap. I want it to come right out of the window, straight, and then go down, and I want it to go down late. That's a curveball. That's what we call a wipeout curveball. That curveball strikes hitters out. And you can't throw that without proper hand and arm mechanics. I can throw the big humpy one like I'm casting a fishing line, but I have to get out here and use my fingers to throw a flat, late breaking curveball. With the slider, you know, we know this, the slider is a harder pitch on the arm. It's a harder pitch on the elbow, but it's a harder pitch on the elbow because simply it takes a lot of finger strength to throw it. And most kids try to get too much break out of the slider. By definition, our slider should not break more than 6 inches. A cutter is inside of 4 inches. So typically what we'll see is, you know, and we'll even hear mistakes made in professional baseball broadcasts where the broadcaster will say, oh, that's a great slider there. And it's a, you know, like David Cone. Everybody remember David Cone, how he throw that big kind of carry? That's a slurve. That's a slurve. He's dropping his hand angle and he's throwing a flat curveball is all he's doing. Okay, very different from a slider. A slider comes in, it looks like a fastball, and then it separates from the line about 6 inches. The later it separates, the faster it separates, the better it is. Obviously, the best cutter in the game, Mariano Rivera, 4 inches of devastation. Okay, that's it. And if you look at interviews with him and stuff like that, when he was hooking the outside of that pitch and he was getting 6, 8, 10 inches, that pitch was slowing down. It wasn't effective. He knew he was making mistakes. He was getting outside it too much and not staying on top. So that's an important teach. If you have a kid whose fingers are strong enough and he can spin the ball and get that tight rotation, make sure that you're letting him know, I don't want to see big break on your slider. I want to see late, fast break on your slider. I want that thing to get to the front of the plate and move off 6 inches, move off 4 inches. Okay, the goal is not to miss the barrel with the slider. The goal is for the hitter to think he's got it squared up and on a right-handed hitter, right-hand pitcher, and the slider finds the very end of the barrel. That's the goal. It's not to miss it, it's to blow the cap off of it. If it's a left-handed hitter, it's not to miss the barrel, it's to break the bat is the goal. Questions on those at all? And you'll see we'll talk about hand strength and developing hand strength as we kind of get into things a little bit more. I'll go over some pitching mechanics stuff, but Lucas, based on your email, I thought this would fit best, just kind of going over how we want to, you know, kind of develop things. And these are some of the common questions I get asked. So I'm going to just, the disclaimer, I don't believe in pitch counts. I believe that that great throwers are great throwers because they love to throw and they love to throw all the time. Now, remember what I said earlier? I never spent a day of my life playing baseball where my arm didn't hurt, but I also remember that I would throw for a day and then I'd take 2 days off. Then I'd throw and I'd take time off, or those kinds of things. I find that my best throwers are the guys that want to throw every day. And I'm a firm believer, the more you throw, the more you get efficient at throwing, the more athletic you get, the more you develop yourself as a thrower. With that being said, there's a difference between practicing throwing and playing catch. Playing catch implies screwing around and not paying attention to being athletic. Practicing throwing, I'm being intentional about what I'm doing. And there's a big difference there in the mind of an athlete, I think. The other thing with throwing is if it becomes too mechanical, too robotic, everything breaks down. And so I liken it to this. What we know about the throwing athlete, and a lot of people don't realize this, when I talk about the throwing athlete, I'm going to give you a category, I'm going to put in a box the throwing athletes in sport. Swimmers, all of these athletes, the throwing action happens and they all do the same basic biomechanical movements. Swimmers, javelin throwers, football quarterbacks, volleyball players, all your positions on a baseball field, and hitting. The exact same mechanics, exact same biomechanics, kinetic chain, if you will, that's used to throw a baseball is used to hit a baseball. Exact same biomechanic chain. Okay, energy starts in the feet, it starts from the ground. We gather that energy from the ground, we load into our knees, we load into our hips, we load into our core, we separate, we lengthen, and we send it out through something. If I'm a pitcher or a thrower, that out through something is my fingertips. If I'm a hitter, that out through something is the sweet spot of the bat. But the mechanics to get to do all that are the exact same. I've got a really cool picture in my office of the third baseman of the Oakland A's, and it's superimposed over the top, him throwing a strike, a bullet to first base, and him hitting a home run. And the superimposed, the only difference is he's got a glove in his hand as opposed to a bat in his hand. And they're both frozen on the exact same spot where his body is right here and you see his bat is right here. And everything is literally in the exact same spot of efficiency. So we know that. We know there's specific things that throwing athletes have to do, and the more they're athletic, the more they can do it. So the reason I'm saying that, guys, is we have to train that athleticism to be a thrower along with the mechanical pieces. That's really important. So anything we do has to go along with that. A long toss program, any kid that's strong enough to hold a glove can do long toss. Okay? I literally was just doing a clinic, West Madison Little League. One of the coaches brought his kid. I long tossed with his 8-year-old kid. Okay? Could have long tossed with him probably when he was 7. And the funny part was the kid's a pie slinger, and his dad comes walking in with the kid, and the first thing dad says, he goes, "Man, I hope you're going to give me a secret, because he really struggles with his elbow being down and really throwing pies." This coach has been in my clinics before. We allowed the kid to be athletic for a little bit, and the dad thought I was some kind of like weird genius or something. He's like, "I've never seen that. Like, he's on top, his elbow's up." And I said, "Well, yeah, he's just being athletic. We're just letting him move." And before, he was just standing doing the, you've all seen it, the kind of half step, turn, chest forward, and throw. Well, that's not athletic. You can't punch anybody that way. You couldn't hit a volleyball that way. You got to load your hips, load your shoulders, move your feet. Once he understood how to do that, I didn't teach. We taught nothing with handbrake, arm movement, anything. We focused on just him moving athletically, and he was able to figure the rest out himself. So that's pretty powerful. When we look at long toss, I like to start with form work because I want to reinforce what you're supposed to be doing before you start putting the loads on the arm. And so these are just some things I have. Figure eights are just, they're not even really figure eights. It's just really just moving the arm and just being fluid with it. And it's just more of a mental reminder: be fluid, be loose. Think of your arm like a whip. Think of it like a rope. I tell guys the ball is a yo-yo. your shoulder, you're holding the string. If you've ever swung a yo-yo around, your arm should be the string. It's just trying to get the yo-yo where it belongs. And I just want them to get a feel for that. It doesn't need to be done with a rope or with a towel or anything. It can just be barehanded. Dry throwing from a seated position, literally their butts on the ground. They can sit like Indian style or have their feet out, whatever. But the reason is I want them to feel core engagement. So if I'm going to have any kind of arm speed, my core has to work. And most kids, they don't know how to use their core. So, and I'll give you an example of this. Okay. John, I saw one of your little ones running around there. Okay. If you ask him to breathe, they breathe up here. And so you ask them to take a deep breath, and you would think they'd fill their lungs, but then put your finger on their belly button and say, take a deep breath, where you push my finger away, and they pull in a whole bunch more air. They don't know how to engage their core yet. And so by sitting them down on their butt and having them go through a dry mechanic, I can't do that if I don't sit up, if I don't open my chest up, if I don't open my shoulders. So, and I'm a big believer in self-teach. I want them to feel more than me tell. So if I can put them in that position where they can get that feel for being up over the ball, it's easier for me to teach later when we're going to be up on our feet and doing stuff. Because I can, hey, remember how that felt when you were seated? That's what I need you to feel right now, instead of this, where their shoulders are rolled and they're impinging their shoulder and they're not getting back at all because their shoulders are rolled. Okay. I'll talk about what we look for in throwing athletes when we know that they're right. And then Coach, you can chime in and tell me what you've seen over your, if that body type matches what I'm saying, that matches with what you've seen. Then I want them moving their feet. So when I talk about moving their feet, I talk about turning and shuffling once or twice, and then dry throw. So I'm teaching that rhythm, right? So I'm teaching that rhythm of shuffle, shuffle, throw. Okay? I'm teaching them to be athletic. Get your body to work together. Get your feet to work. I need that kinetic chain to start. I need that energy to start coming up through your feet and leave your fingertips. So I've got to give them a feel for that without them having to have a ball. As soon as they have a ball, they're going to think about where the ball's going. I don't want them thinking about that. I want them to think about what their body's doing. Then I'm going to put something in their hand now. So they've gone empty. So now we're going to repeat a couple of these with something in their hand. This can be a towel with a knot in it. We use these things called the rope. A friend of mine, a scout with the Nationals, created it, and our guys love it. It's just a ball with some ropes that you can put up attached to it, but it costs money, and a ripped up towel is free. So I've seen guys use socks. Socks work fine. Just tie a knot, put them in your fingers. You want some resistance. And I'm going to drop my back knee down, separate my hands, and then I'm going to throw. The reason I've got my back knee down is I'm teaching extension. Here's a teaching point. Careful what we say. As soon as you tell a kid to follow through on the mound, they're going to drop their head, leave their arm behind, and miss upstairs even more. And you just said follow through because you want them to come down in the zone. Our words can be translated very different in the actions that happen and what happens out of those actions. Okay, if I want a kid to go down in the zone, what I actually want him to do is not follow through. I want his chest bigger when he's going to the plate, and I want him to take his thumb and I want him to rip it past his glove side hip. I want him to finish, stay tall, finish against it, and rip it through. That's going to bring the ball down. As soon as his body goes forward like this, the arm gets left behind and he's going to miss up. Okay? So having the knee down gets him used to having that open posture I was talking about, and then feeling ripping past his knee and where his head's supposed to be when he finishes. Then we're going to move our feet. Okay, and again, posture is important. Eyes will control posture. If you tell your kid to stare at their target, throw the ball through your target, look through your target like you have x-ray vision, the posture will follow where the eyes go. Take your kids that are your least accurate, and one of the first things you should do is where are their eyes going? Are their eyes looking through their target, or their eyes looking just off to the side? Okay, and you'll find that the eyes probably aren't going where they're supposed to at release. They're moving to the side somewhere or something else. If the eyes aren't trained on your target, it's going to be really hard to release the ball to it. Then we would go into sequencing work. So we've done some form, then we're going to go into sequencing work. So sequencing is just a building up of what we prioritize to build the thrower. So we talked about four-seam grip. Okay, so we're going to go short lever, long lever. Some people ask me, can we combine these? We combine them in our program. Our guys combine them now. We just do them at the same time. All I'm doing is isolating grip. I'm isolating my elbow up. And what I don't want to see is this action. What I want to see is only from my elbow up to my fingertips. This isn't a jump shot. This is a contest for who can spin the ball the fastest. So me and my partner are competing against each other. Who can create the whitest blur on the ball? Who can create the whitest blur on the ball? And it doesn't matter what age. 7-year-olds can do this. Seniors in college can do this. It doesn't matter. I'm getting a feel for creating spin. You'll be surprised how many kids can't feel spin come out of their hand. Your best ones can. The only difference between short lever and long lever, if I really want to isolate it, I'll take the gloves off and I'll actually have them grab their wrist so that they're only using their wrist here. And then long lever, they're allowed to use the whole thing. But again, it's, I would just let them go with the long lever, go straight to long lever unless you think there's really a grip problem. That's also a great time for you as a coach. I'll say this. Back up. Pet peeve of mine. Practice starts and the coaches are having the coffee clutch down the line while everybody's working on throwing. Okay? And we know this statistically, until you get to the varsity level, you do not start winning baseball games until you get to the varsity level of high school. This is important, and it's important for your youth coaches up there to understand, okay? Below the varsity level, you lose baseball games because teams can't catch and throw. So the team that walks away with the W didn't win the game. The other team lost the game. They made more mistakes every time. When you get to the varsity level, your athletes are good enough where you're making less catch and throw errors, where you're actually teaching them how to win baseball games now, because you can't just rely on the other team throwing the ball away. Does that make sense? And that's an important thing for youth coaches to understand, because youth coaches are coaching to win baseball games, and they should be coaching not to lose baseball games. And I used this example earlier today. I was fortunate my first year ever playing baseball. I was 12 years old, and I was so excited because I made the all-star team. And I was a fast-pitch softball kid growing up. That's what my dad did. Why would you play baseball? My brother wanted to play, I had to play. It's the way it was. One ride, we're going to the field. And I made the all-star team. I was so excited because our all-star coach is like ridiculously good. We won all these state titles and this and that. He'd been to the World Series and blah, blah, blah. And we go to all-star practice, and this is back in the old days, all-stars, we had like 2 to 3 weeks of practice, and then you went to tournaments trying to get to Williamsport, right? And our first 2 or 3 weeks, we never hit. Like at all. Like not in a cage, not on the field. We never hit. And it sucked. And we got beat in the state championship game. Like, we went all the way to the state championship game before we finally lost a game. And I remember I was coming out of college, and I was coaching in the summers. I was coaching Legion. And Carlos Avila was our coach's name, and he was still coaching. And it was back in the day where it was like the same guy coaching the all-star team. Like he coached it for like 20 years. He was the best coach in the league kind of thing. And I remember asking him, I said, Carlos, why you hit with your team during the season? Why did we never hit? It was the first time I ever heard it, guys. He said, because you don't win baseball games at this level, you lose them. And he goes, you guys play great catch and throw. And so nobody could beat us because we never lost games. He goes, the only time we made more than 2 errors, 12-year-old little leagues, and he was right. He goes, that kind of guy, right? He remembered back then. The only time that we lost when you guys were in All-Stars was in the state championship, and you guys made 5 errors. 4 of them were throwing errors. He goes, they had no earned runs. He was exactly right. And the same thing was on the games that we won. We hit it hard. We ran fast. Teams bobbled it. They threw it away. So that's an important thing when we think about developing our throwers and helping our kids understand and our youth coaches understand that it's developing guys' ability to catch and throw. And so everything we do in our drills should emphasize that. So we go through our sequencing: short lever, long lever, back knee down, same as before. And then we want to have our feet set. So when our feet are set, what we want the thrower to focus on, we're taking his lower body away. His knees are bent. He's in an athletic position. He catches the ball. We want him to focus now on proper separation and arm mechanics. So he's always going to start in a prayer position. And I don't care. You can turn a kid sideways a little bit, or you can have him facing this way. I don't really care. The younger kids, I will turn them a little bit, just because I find that if I don't, they separate, try and turn their body and then throw, and it becomes real mechanical. And so if I already turn them, they become just a little more fluid. Older guys can tend to turn and then separate. So kind of use your judgment on that one. But we don't want them moving their feet, because we want them only thinking about their upper body. And what they're thinking about, they're in this prayer position, meaning their hands are like they're praying, not here. And this translates to the mound, exact same position on the mound. Okay, we don't want a pitcher actually here when he starts his motion and he's going to separate. We want him to be into this position, because this is going to create clean hand separation. They may start here to get their sign, but once they move into their motion and they get ready to lift, now we want them in that prayer position so they get clean out of the glove. Okay, and I've had coaches, I've heard coaches say, well, gosh, are you giving the pitch away to the hitter, the guy at second base? I'm like, if a guy at second base, at the point that the pitcher's lifting his leg, can flash what pitch is coming, and the hitter's that good, then he's got a garbage can in the dugout and a buzzer on his body. So we're not worried about that. Okay? So I've got my feet set. I'm in my prayer position. Now what I want him to do is I want him to turn so they get used to closing the body, using the core again, closing the body, separating the hands, thumbs down, elbows up. Okay? Here. And there's a couple ways to teach it. I don't want separation over the top, and I don't want pulling out of here. And I can tell you why all of those things are bad and why we want to go this way. Okay? I want to go down here. The teach for kids is, for high school kids, it's usually very simple. Just drop your thumbs down, elbows up. Okay, that's usually pretty simple for them. For younger kids, sometimes they need something else to hang on to. So I've literally done this on hot days in camp before. I've taken 2 cups of water, like Dixie cups, and I've taken one kid in camp and had him sit down, or one of my coaches and had him sit down right below the kid, and I put the 2 Dixie cups in the prayer position for the kid, and I said, dump the cups on the kid, on his head. Yep, that's how we're going to throw. Every time we come out of the glove, we're throwing that way. Dump the cups every time we throw. Okay? Now, I'm a big in our program, my guys ask why. They know that that's okay. I want them to understand why, because I believe we're going to get to where we need to get faster. And if I can't explain the why, then I shouldn't be teaching it. The days are gone where you do what I say because I said it. They have to be able to understand why. They have to be able to process it. The why is okay. So why are we separating? Why are we emphasizing that? There's a number of reasons, and they're pretty simple to understand. These are the common sense things. If I take a pitcher or any person, and I take their hands and I separate over the top, And now I put 2 kettlebells in each hand. I'm going to put a 15-pound kettlebell in each hand, and I'm going to ask you to sit there and hold them. You're going to feel it on the interior part of your elbow, the median side of your elbow, right where your UCL is on both of them, and you're not going to be able to stay there very long. Nobody would do a fly on a bench, a flat bench, and do a fly and allow themselves to be in this position for very long. If I take your hands and I go here, not back, just separate them right here, and I give you those same 2 kettlebells, we're comfortable as can be. All the pressure gets pushed across my traps, down my lats, down my back muscles. All the large muscles are taking all the impact. And if those muscles are taking that impact, those muscles are also starting to load up. And I want my muscles to start loading up because I want to release that energy at some point. So I need those big muscles to be working in the correct way. The reason we don't want to pull straight back like this, think Yogi Berra back in the days. Bill, this is the way we used to teach catchers, right? Pull it out like a bow and arrow and throw. That used to be the terminology we used to use back in the day. That's how I was taught and everything, okay? The reason we don't want that is that creates, if you could see my back, it creates the scaps to load up too soon. So it causes the 2 shoulder blades to immediately start to pinch. And the problem is I'm not in a position where my core can support it. So what happens when we do that, when the throwing athlete does that, he pinches and now he comes out and his chest comes out here. So Lucas, as a former catcher, okay, if you think about your son, I don't know if you're catching still for home talent or anything. I don't scout home talent games. But catchers, when they get that ball that tails to the second base side, and then you think back on it, you have to rush, you muscle up, you get that scap load too soon, and your chest comes out, the elbow drops, and the ball takes off. The same thing happens to the pitcher or shortstop. If the scap load happens too soon, the elbow drops, the chest is forward, and I end up doing this and the ball takes off. This is the third baseman or the shortstop that takes the first baseman into the runner every single time and can't understand why, okay? And the why is he's pulling directly out of the glove. He's not separating, dropping his hands from his glove. Okay? Questions? I'll pause there.
Somebody's calling me, Al, but I'm probably going to have to exit, but I just want to tell you that was fantastic. I really appreciate it. And my question is, you know, I've heard hundreds of people talk about pitching, but your information is unique. And, you know, I never had an original thought. I copied everything from somebody, and I'm wondering who is there a piece of a work or a book? You know, we used to read books on pitching, and Bob Shaw and others, but who has influenced your pitching philosophy the most?
The same. I steal from, I mean, all of us do that, right? We steal from everybody we can. I was kind of lucky when I was a young coach starting out in California. Are you all familiar with Alan Yeager, Jay Bands, that kind of thing? So Alan and I are about the same age, and we kind of did the speaking circuit at the same time. And so we bumped into each other, and I listened to him, he listened to me. So certainly a lot of just kind of some common sense. And he kind of had the same experience as a college pitcher that I had as a catcher, where he was just baffled. Why is my arm always hurting? Like, this isn't right. Why am I always in pain? I shouldn't be in pain all the time. And it kind of became a passion for him. I've gotten good things out of Tom House. And I'll tell you now, I'm not a Tom House fan. And I'll you know, Paul Reddick is a guy he's an internet sensation right now in terms of pitching stuff. And he's got some good stuff. There's some stuff I think is garbage. Where I get stuck, and it's really, you know, Perry Ellis, Gordy Gillespie. You remember Gordy? Probably my number one person would have been Gordy, just talking pitching with Gordy. And my pitching coach in college was phenomenal. Tom Herr. I went to Marion, and Tom was amazing. It just very common sense. I'm a big fan of, anyway, a number of guys. But one thing that bothers me, and it bothers me with hitting too, is we have too many guys right now that are my style. Like, you have to be, if you don't do this, you're not any good. Like, if you don't teach velocity, you're not any good. And I think that really hurts our game. I think it hurts our hitters, and I think it hurts our throwers. You know, it's, and I just, like I said, again, it's common sense. Like, if it doesn't pass the smell test, I'm sorry, it just doesn't work.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, get on your call. We'll talk to you later.
Very good. Thank you.
Good to see you, Coach. All right. Any other questions before I jump into starting to move our feet now when we're going through this throwing routine? Okay, so we move into now we've kind of gone through the form work. We understand what we're doing, and we're repping this every day, guys. We're repping this. This is practice does not start later. Practice started now. Like, this is the most important thing. It is at the front end of practice because it is what we're prioritizing. BP is not a priority. It's at the end. If practice gets cut short, BP gets cut. Throwing does not get cut. And I think that's important to emphasize that with our players is, you know, if throwing is not important to you, stick it at the end of practice because you don't need it to warm up. I can take John Adair and I can take John and his nephew Dom and I can take them out to the field right now and we'll go play baseball. If I have them run enough, they're loose enough to throw. I don't need to throw to warm up. I need to throw to practice throwing. Okay, and so that's very important. If it's not a priority, stick it at the end of practice so that if things get banged, that goes. If it's a priority, it's at the front end of practice. Everything in our practice that's the most important goes to the front of practice every day. Moving your feet and working back to a max distance. So now we've gone through everything. Now we're into a straight, just shuffling our feet and moving. And this is really important, and you're going to find with your young coaches, your coaches that coach younger kids, they have to slow the kids down first. So you're going to have to actually do a turn, shuffle, and throw, and slow them down because they're going to want to do the turn and shuffle all at the same time, and then everything breaks down. Okay? So we want them to turn, shuffle, and throw. The one thing I didn't mention earlier on throwing is when the hands separate, I don't worry about the backhand, this hand here, okay, that's got the ball in it. If they separate correctly, things are going to work out pretty well there. So I don't worry about teaching that. A common mistake is coaches will try and teach, well, he's got a long arm motion or he's got a short arm motion or whatever. I don't care. Okay, I've seen a million different players that take a short circle on the back, a long circle on the back, and they've all been successful. Okay, but how they get into that circle and the fact that they're making a circle is what's important. So if I'm coaching a catcher at the collegiate level, I'd rather have a catcher that has a high circle up here. He's making a circle around his head, but he's making a circle. He's not making lines, he's making a circle. I want my shortstop to have a high circle. I tell them stay above your belly button as a shortstop. My outfielders need to get a little more carry, so I want them to get a little more length, so their hand separation might be down by their belt buckle a little more. Okay, my pitchers might be down by their belt buckle, but if they're up here, I'm going to leave them up there. So that's an important thing. The front side, I want pointed to the target, and I don't care if a kid points his elbow or his glove to the target. What you have to remember as a coach, whatever the front side does, the back side's going to do. So if I point my glove, I'm probably going to have a longer, slower backside coming forward. You can create more deception with the glove. You can actually create more accuracy, but it's going to be really hard to create velocity with a kid that points his glove out there. Okay, because the arm's going to be longer action on the back side. If it's shorter on the front side, the elbow, the arm action is going to be a little faster on the back side and everything's going to happen a little quicker. Okay. So you're going to see it, you see a guy like a Jamie Moyer, very much, I'm going way old school, soft thrower, very much the gloves out in front, very accurate, soft with his stuff. And if I go another old school guy, I go a Nolan Ryan, very short on the front, quick arm action on the back as he explodes through. So we know that what the front does, the back's going to copy it. So sometimes you'll find it easier to teach the front and not worry about the back, knowing that they're going to copy each other. And then I want him to stay, I call it connected. I want the athlete to stay connected with the gloves. So once they get out here, okay, and I don't want them back like this. I want them out here. Once they get out there and the ball starts to come forward, I don't want them pulling back in, because when I pull back in, it causes my head to do this, and that leaves my arm behind. I want them to squeeze the glove and take their chest to the glove, but I want them to stay connected. I want the glove in this area. I never want the glove to fall here, down to their side and away. And the reason is that weight will take their head that way. And if the head leaves the tunnel, if the head leaves the midline too soon, about the ball, the too soon is when the ball's halfway, typically is what we think of. If the midline, if my head leaves too soon, the ball, my arm slot's going to change. I'm going to have trouble throwing the ball correctly. So I want the head to stay in the tunnel as long as possible. And by staying connected with the glove, I am ensuring that my head stays there as long as possible. Now, here's the challenge to you guys, and this is where video is kind of fun. I hate young pitchers watching professional pitchers work. Same thing with hitters, because I always have to use a disclaimer. Yeah, but they're professionals. Like, you have no idea until you stand next to one how much of a freak athlete he is. But some of the things that video allows us to do is, you'll see guys that will see a pitcher and it looks like he's very violent. I have some video, for instance, Tim Lincecum. I got to work with Tim Lincecum when he was in college, and I had him for a summer league one time. And those of you remember Tim Lincecum, it seemed like he was like going to first base, right, when he threw the baseball. And I'll never forget this. Interesting, I was working in the bullpen with Tim, and I always ask my pitchers this when I got them for the summer. I said, and I'd ask their coaches the same thing. So Timmy was at University of Washington. So I asked his coach what he needed to work on. He told me. Tim got there and I said, okay, I got my notebook. I'm like, Tim, what do I need to watch to help you get better? And he goes, Coach, I know myself pretty well. And notoriously, his dad was his coach and this and that. But he very self-aware. He said, I know my body, I know myself pretty well, but the one thing I need you to watch is when the ball's halfway, I need to be on line. If I'm offline before the ball gets halfway there, I'm done. I'm going to hurt myself. I'm not going to have velocity. I'm not going to have my movement. And that was crazy to me because his movement when the ball got halfway was so violently offline that for him to be aware of that microsecond that he had to stay in the tunnel was incredible, but he was dead on. Like, if he left even a hair sooner, the ball was up, velocity was down, he had no breaking ball, the split didn't work. It was incredible how bad his stuff got. And at that time, he was a $150 and throwing 95 miles an hour. And so for him, that violent action offline was necessitated because the body was so slight. He couldn't throw the ball with that kind of velocity without all the crazy mechanics that he had and everything. Another good video example in super slow motion so kids can see the difference of staying in the tunnel versus what the naked eye sees moving out of it is Noah Syndergaard. So there's a big giant body, and when you watch him throw, Felix Hernandez is another example, and you watch him throw, it appears to the naked eye that they're falling way off to the side. But when you slow it down frame by frame, what you see is they're very tight and in the tunnel until they see the ball about halfway, and then they explode out of the tunnel and they let their body go. So that's an important thing for kids to understand. You can't command the baseball and you can't throw with velocity if you can't stay in the tunnel between you and the catcher. Okay? And it's easy tunnel to think about. You have the rubber, you have home plate. That's the tunnel. They're the same width. So we want to do that when we're moving our feet then, okay? So we're going to shuffle and throw. After 10 throws, and this should move pretty quick. Everything's done in about 5 throws or so. Okay, about 10 throws, we're going to start moving back. We want easy velocity. Okay, easy velocity. If you have to try hard to throw hard, you're in trouble. We want easy velocity. It should feel like the ball's jumping out of your hand without you trying super hard. Okay, and they'll get a feel for that as they do more and more long toss. Long toss continues to go back until one or both of the partners can't reach the other one anymore in the air. So the ball's one hopping. Now you're done with that, with what we call the lengthening phase of long toss. There's 2 phases. Everybody forgets the second phase. The lengthening phase is moving back until we one hop the ball. Okay? At that point, and I'll back up. I don't care if the ball has loft on it. They can put as much air under it as they want, as long as they don't throw their mechanics out and start flinging their glove everywhere and stuff like that. As long as they can stay in the tunnel, be in control, move their feet, they can put as much loft under the ball as they want to get it there. Okay? But they have to be in control of their body. Once the ball is one hop, now we start the same process coming back in. 1 or 2 throws, 1 or 2 steps coming in. And they keep coming in, except now they're trying to bring the ball down. This is the acceleration phase of long toss, and this is the part guys forget about, okay? Because most guys end long toss with a lob session, and we're not trying to train the arm to work slower, we're training the arm to work faster. We're creating a new comfort level that was uncomfortable before. So now as they come in, they're bringing the ball down, 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 and they just keep bringing it down, and they're pulling through the ball. They're snapping through it past their hip. I want more arm speed from release to hip than on the back side. I want to see the arm go. I want to, if I'm standing next to them, I want to hear the fingers ripping through the ball. They're throwing it under their partner's shoulders until they get about 60 feet away from their partner. And now it becomes good old-fashioned burnout. Who can throw harder? And the only rule is it's got to be below my shoulders. Give me a good hop, get on top, and let me see 98 miles an hour at my belly button. So be aware, if you've got one kid that takes long toss serious, you got to make sure he's with a kid that can handle the velocity at that distance. So he's going to get blown up if he's doing it right. Okay? And I'm going to do about 5 throws from about 60 feet, bringing the heat to my partner's belly button, and then I'm done. Now I'm done throwing. I don't cool down. I don't slow down. You can take me into infield throwing drills or other throwing drills, but in terms of long toss, I'm done. Now, something I didn't put in here, because this is pretty regimented. When you get your kids that are more advanced, take the numbers away. So if you get a kid that you're like, this kid's one of those once-in-a-lifetime kids. He's an all-conference kid as a sophomore, as a pitcher. He's going to get some money in college. He's got a shot to play pro ball. Please, please, please do not put handcuffs on that kid. That's the kid you say to him, listen to your body. If long toss for you is 30 minutes, then you go long toss for 30 minutes. I'm not going to keep that kid in a box, because if you do that, that kid's not going to develop. A great example, I don't know, John and Lucas, if you guys remember Madison Memorial's #1 last year, Kyle Youngers. So Kyle's in our program right now, little right-hander, 80 on a good day, 79, 80 miles an hour, great feel for 4 pitches. Kyle came to our program, and he played for Tim Richardson, who played for me. So it's not like he wasn't familiar with some of the stuff we do. But when Kyle came, one of the biggest things in Kyle's decision-making was me convincing Kyle that our throwing program was going to help him and not hurt him. Because in his mind, he needed to pitch, not throw it all and rest, and then maybe play second, and then for sure play second, and then be ready to be a starting pitcher again. And it just happens that we're having a pitching conversation. This happened. So last week we're creating some recruiting videos, and Kyle's got one of our conditioning segments on pitching and arm care. And so Kyle's talking to recruits in this video, and I was laughing my ass off because I'm watching the video, and the first thing he says in the video is he says, if you're a pitcher and you want to love to throw, this is where you need to be, because I long toss all the time. In fact, my first outing, I threw 75 pitches in Mississippi, and I long tossed for 20 minutes the next day in the outfield. That's ultimately where we want our throwing athletes to get, is to the point where they're so in tune with their body, they're paying attention that they love to throw, they want to throw. Now, are there days where Kyle is going to be sore and he's not going to want to throw the next day? There are. What we're going to do is have him throw anyway, but we're not going to have him throw a baseball. We'll let him throw a wiffle ball. We'll let him throw it 40 feet. We'll let him throw without a ball and just do dry mechanics. Because when he's sore and he's stiff, what I don't want to do is condition his body to wait for the next time. Compare it to this. Lucas, do you still lift weights?
A bit.
A little. Okay, perfect. Okay. You ever go in and squat?
Yeah.
Okay. So what happens when you get a good squat workout and you actually get John Adair to go work out with you, and you get a good squat workout in? Okay. You can't sit down for a couple of days and stuff, right?
Yep.
If you don't go back in and squat, that same cycle happens, right? It's just a cycle of soreness over and over and over. And your squat form goes to shit because you're trying to compensate to not feel the pain and stuff. The same thing happens with our throwing athletes. When they get, there's a difference between pain and soreness, and too many of them back off because of soreness, and they have to be reminded, you're conditioning muscles. This is the same feeling you get when you bench press or when you're doing squats. I may not want you to go out and long toss for 20 minutes, but you got to teach your body how to throw. You got to teach your muscles how to be comfortable throwing. And if you stay with it, pretty soon your body gets efficient. You start using things correctly, and pretty soon the soreness goes away. And I think that's a really critical thing to be in tune with. And again, pitch counts are there for a reason, because quite frankly, it's very hard to be able to see with our eyes when a pitcher is tired, when he needs to come out of a game. And so to protect the coach, protect the kid, we have pitch counts because we have the science that tells us about this time. Now that science doesn't take into account what that kid did yesterday with his travel team or with mom and dad or whatever, but it's the best we have. But the more we can get them used to practicing going through the throwing, the better. And so this is a way to do that. The video at the bottom that I highlighted, this is actually Alan Yeager. This is a really old video, but it does a great job explaining the feel and what we're looking for. It shows two guys playing long toss at 100 yards and then coming back into 60 feet and just throwing easy velocity, just throwing absolute bullets to each other. So it's a good example to share with your kids and stuff. Questions on long toss at all, or throwing development?
I mean, you mentioned the young age. Should our youth teams be long tossing? How often?
Every practice.
Okay.
Because it's just going to be right. Long toss is different. So for your number one on the varsity, his goal may be to throw 200, 300 feet. Okay. But for the 7-year-old team, long toss for them might be 90 feet. And they may only do it 2 or 3 times, and then they start working back in. So again, don't, take a look, and it's going to be different for every kid. Some kids are going to be more advanced. Some kids are going to be less advanced. Some kids aren't ready for a baseball. So give them a wiffle ball, let them work with a wiffle ball, a tennis ball, whatever. But you want to get them used to some distance in throwing and not just keep them in a little tiny box. There's plenty of drills to do in a little tiny box, and you're going to want to do those drills. 4 corners drills, stuff like that are critical for kids and developing accuracy and stuff. But if you want to get them comfortable with throwing, then they got to throw. Let them get out and go. And they'll tell you. I mean, kids are especially little kids. You know, if they know coach is willing to hear, they're going to say right away, I don't feel like doing this. This doesn't feel good. And it's usually because they're not being athletic. They're not moving their feet. When we're done with long toss, we're doing these workouts. So, you know, we're going 2-3 times a week. Some guys will go up to 4 times. Typically, if I'm prescribing, I'll prescribe 2 to 3 times. I think that's what I've got on this one, if I'm not mistaken. Probably put 6 times a week, didn't I? No, 2 to 3 times. There we go. Then these would be things. We know that we don't want, so something you'll hear me say all the time to our players is, if anything you're doing in training, if it doesn't somehow translate directly to a baseball game, why are you doing it? It has to translate to the game you're playing. So you got to be able to tell me what the translation is. Why are you doing it? So an example of that would be, back in the day, we used to run a lot of poles. Pitchers did distance running, right? You hand out a pair of running shoes to pitchers, and then you hand them a rake, a fungo, and their glove. We know now that there's nothing, the pitcher has the single, this is amazing to me, but this is an absolute truth, guys. The most violent and explosive action in all of sport is pitching a baseball. No other action. A right hook from Mike Tyson, an uppercut from a right hook from Evander Holyfield, an uppercut from Mike Tyson. Okay, nothing uses and releases the amount of kinetic energy in athletics that pitching a baseball does. It's an incredibly violent and explosive action. So why would we have a distance runner train to run distance and then ask them to do something that a sprinter would do coming out of the blocks over and over and over? And if you think about it, again, this is a common sense piece, right? I want my pitcher to be really good at explosive sprinting for about 4 steps. And I want him to do it over and over. And I want him to be able to do it 120 times in a row with very little rest in between. Because if he can do that, that kid can throw 100 pitches on the mound without his arm breaking down. So we run 90-foot sprints, 10 reps. You can increase them, but again, this is part of a workout, you know, for them to get ready and stuff. And you can shorten that for little kids. If it's, you know, if they're 7-8-year-olds, you know, they can do 45-foot sprints. Again, we want the explosiveness in the first 4, but we do want to build some wind. We want them to have to still be explosive when their body's a little tired. Overhead squats, these are critical. I've got videos on all of these. Some people will ask me, I don't know the man, but the New York Yankees' new head of sports medicine and strength development, for my money, he's probably the best baseball conditioning person in the world right now. His name's Eric Cressy. And so if you're in doubt about what's out there and if it translates, he would be somebody I would say go to and look and see what he prescribes. There's a reason that, I mean, the Yankees have been the most injured team for the last 10 years in professional baseball, and they handed him the reins to sports medicine, strength and development, et cetera, et cetera. And certainly he's had a lot of success. Again, there's a common sense to a lot of the stuff he does. Most people know him because he writes an article for Men's Health, but he's far more into the baseball and throwing stuff than that. But anyway, there's plenty of others. He's just one that I find a lot of common sense with. So you've got the videos. Overhead squats, what do? They open up my chest. They open up my back. They put my thoracic spine, what we call my T-spine, which is critical in hitting a baseball and throwing a baseball correctly. Proper T-spine alignment is critical. It puts me in a good T-spine position. And then most importantly, it opens my hips. And that's one of the biggest power drainers for pitchers is when their hips are tight. Because when your hips are tight, your body doesn't move correctly. When their hips have some separation, they're a little bit looser. You want this action to be able to happen in the body. When that can happen, then pitcher can be successful. and they can get into their legs a little bit more too. So that's a go-to exercise for us. We do it every single day. In arm circles, the biggest thing here, you're just making small circles, medium circles. You see I've got a kind of a visual, a basketball, a Bosu ball, and a hula hoop. You're making an equal circle in those. I'm going forward for 8 to 12, and then I'm going backwards from 8 to 12. The key piece to arm circles, palms have to be up. That's a critical piece. The palms have to be up. If you put the palms down, you're working the larger muscles around the shoulder joint, the rotator cuff area. You're working the deltoids, you're working your scaps. Arm circles with the palms down. Those are slow muscles. Those are power recruitment muscles. We don't want to train slow. We want to train fast. We want to train speed. Remember what I said, pitching is a violent, explosive speed action. By turning the palms up like I'm catching snowflakes or rain and keeping my arms straight, I'm going to get that burn in there. I'm going to get those small, fast twitch muscles to start burning. And you'll feel it. You guys can do it yourselves. Just kind of go through an 8, go bigger, and 8, and go bigger, and you'll feel that burn in your shoulders. That is the single best warm-up throwing exercise as well. Okay? Younger kids, that's the only warm-up exercise I would actually do with kids. We don't stretch anybody out. We don't do any of that. We get their heart rate going. We do arm circles. Time to rock and roll. J-bands, I attached a PDF with Alan's J-band exercises in there. So again, we talked about stealing earlier. He shouldn't put it on the internet if he didn't want you to have it. Upward tosses, you can see how those are. And those are just done with a baseball. And you can do them lying down on your side, or you can do them standing up. I like standing up for kids because it teaches some coordination a little bit. The weight of the ball really doesn't matter. You know, there are drive line, different programs like that do use weighted balls and stuff, and we'll do some of these with those. And I'll talk about that later, but you don't need that. It can be just, I'm flipping it up and I'm catching it. I'm flipping it up and I'm catching it. And it's just to get that arm. Again, I'm working those fast twitch muscles and I'm conditioning them. Band pull aparts. I put on there, you can also do these with a belt. So a kid might say, well, you know, we don't have surgical tubing, coach, or whatever, but they're probably coming to the park with their elastic baseball belt. Take the belt off. I can use my elastic baseball belt for band pull aparts. Works fine. Over the head and so on. Side bridge with a horizontal abduction. Just using the weight of a baseball glove is fine for this one. In the demonstration, you'll see him using, I think, a 10-pound plate. But again, if a kid's just did a long toss workout, he can use whatever he has with him. And so his glove is going to be fine. It's not about the weight on this. It's about the mobility. These are all mobility exercises. I'm increasing range of motion. Okay. I'm creating athleticism. Cuban presses. Now I've got on there 10-pound weights, but again, if a kid doesn't have weights, the Cuban press movement is more important than the weight. And so if he just has a ball in each hand or a glove in one hand, a ball in the other hand, or even no weight at all, I'm not worried about it because I'm using the Cuban press to create mobility in the shoulder and in the T-spine. So I'm not concerned about the weight as much. Bird dogs. Bird dogs are it's typically used in mobility tests. If somebody goes in for physical therapy, they typically will have to do a bird dog if they've got back problems and stuff. But they're a great way for young athletes to start to feel the engagement of the core and start to understand that separation of opposites. Side-lying windmills, outstanding exercise. Probably one of my favorites for throwing athletes as long as it's done correctly. He does a good job of explaining what wrong looks like and what right looks like in that. And then static stretching always comes last. And I'll come to that one right now real quick. When we're developing throwing athletes, one of the biggest mistakes we make, and it's only until about the last 10 years that we have figured this out, and we've actually figured it out from our Japanese players that have come to Major League Baseball over time. We do not static stretch at the beginning of a baseball practice or a baseball workout. That is one of the single riskiest things we can do for a throwing athlete. Remember how I described the throwing motion and how violent it is? I'm putting so much pressure on the shoulder and the elbow joint when I throw that the act of stretching out my shoulder and loosening that joint up even more puts me at such risk that it's going to continue to separate. We're now seeing this at a higher rate of injuries of the shoulder. The most common injury for baseball pitchers is still UCLs, ulnar collateral ligaments, okay? The second highest injury has always been labral tears. So the labrum holds the ball socket of your shoulder. It's like a suction cup. Think of a plunger, and it keeps it in there. Labral tears have happened for years. What we're seeing now is straight up shoulder subluxation. So we're seeing athletes now where the shoulder, the ball is literally separating from the labrum and coming completely out. That's a football injury. A dislocation of the shoulder is a football injury. It is not a throwing injury. But our athletes are in the weight room. They're getting stronger. And what we're finding is the more they stretch that shoulder joint, the more risk they put at they're lengthening out all those tendons and muscles that are holding everything in tight. They're lengthening it out and loosening it. And now you apply all that force, and it's like somebody grabbed your hand and just jerked your arm right out of its socket. And it's eventually going to go. So the reason I mentioned the Japanese players is Japanese players have been coming over from Japan and coming to the United States, especially pitchers. And what we found is they've been pitching an incredible number of innings compared to our pitchers. And questions have been asked, how can you do that? How do you pitch on a 3-day rotation? We're on a 5-day rotation here. How do you pitch on a 2-day rotation? We're on a 5-day rotation here. And there were two common denominators we found in baseball. One, Japanese players don't get up on a mound until they get to the professional level. That's number one. So they throw flat a lot, which is also why they have to master movement and spin and everything, because everything's coming out flat if you're throwing a fastball. The second, though, is they don't stretch. They warm up to throw. They stretch afterwards. They do mobility, they do yoga, they don't do static stretching. The NFL's done some research in the last 10 years. US Olympic program has done research. And now we know across the board in our ballistic moving sports, you'll see almost no stretching. If you go to the National Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs, you watch the basketball teams, the volleyball teams, the wrestling teams, you'll see no static stretching before they work. You'll see warm-up, movement, ballistic warm-up, and they'll go right into it. They'll static stretch after the fact for the same reason. We don't want to separate the joints when we're going to do movement that's going to ask them to be separated later anyway. Okay? And then when we do our static stretching, our focus is on large muscle groups, not on small muscle groups. So we don't, I will never have my guys do this stretch here. Now, I'll have them grab a wall and turn into it and reach, so they're stretching out across their back, but I'm not going to have them stretch the shoulder joint. Okay, I'm going to have them focus on their hamstrings. I'm going to have them focus on their quads, their calves. They're going to focus their back. They're going to focus on the large muscle groups, but we're not going to focus on the joints themselves. We're never going to isolate a joint in a stretch. And that's a really important thing. Because we want to spend, and if you look down this list, everything that has to do with the shoulder here, after we just got done throwing, it's like taking your body to the mechanic and we're tightening it back up, right? Everything's tightening it back up because we just loosened it while we threw. And I think that's a really important thing. And what we have found with our athletes, our guys that are the healthiest are the ones that understand that right away. and they start to adopt that philosophy, they recover much quicker, they bounce back faster, their mechanics get cleaner quicker, they get stronger, and their velocity jumps a lot faster. They stay healthier over a longer period of time. Our guys who insist on staying with a static stretching program before usually are farther behind. Any questions on those? We're getting chats. Are those for you or me, Lucas?
They were just asked to share out the document again that we're looking at.
Al, I do have a question for you. The
Yes.
static stretching, do you encourage that with everybody at the end of every practice, or is that kind of the post long toss, or when is?
No, when we get done, no, because we're going to jump into other things. So this would just be if somebody, like right now, kids are out doing a long toss workout. They're doing workouts on their own with this. If we're in a practice setting, then at the end of practice, when you normally would get your guys together and you talk to them, we'd be in a circle. They're static stretching, and now I'm delivering whatever message I want to deliver to them. That's our cool down. It's our chill time. You know, John, Lucas, you know this. I mean, a college baseball practice should resemble somewhere in between a high school JV practice and a varsity football game in terms of the energy and the intensity level. And so when you're done, and you need to let them just, okay, chill. Now just focus on your body, listen to your body, and stretch out. You'll see in the next page, yoga. I love yoga, and I will, you know, good luck trying to get young kids to buy into yoga, but you don't need to do a ton of it. You pick 4 or 5 yoga exercises. The guys that actually do, it's incredible how fast your body gets stronger just through doing consistent yoga at the end of a practice or at the end of a throwing routine. And that's something that we haven't, I've known about it and stuff. I've never really implemented it in with our throwing stuff that I do with pitchers until about 4 years ago, I would say. And now it's a staple that we hold on to for our, especially for our pitchers, but for all of our guys. So these are just some other things that can be done that I know will help a throwing athlete. Rice buckets, certainly we think of them to help hitters for hand strength and stuff. But again, if you remember what I was saying earlier, we're getting stronger athletes now, but because they don't do as much manual labor and so on, their hands aren't as strong as they used to be. If we want a pitcher to manipulate the baseball, a rice bucket's a way for them to do that. It gives them a better feel for what their fingers are doing and so on. It's a cheap conditioning tool. They just need they can go down to Home Depot and get a 5-gallon bucket, for $2 or whatever. And then they can go get a big bag of rice for $15 or whatever at Costco. And they're good for 6 months. And hell, let's be honest, they're not changing the rice out. They're good until they're done with it. So they're not going to change the rice out. It'll be whatever. I've never had to tell anybody it's not cooked rice. So hopefully you don't have any kids that are not smart enough to figure out if they don't cook the rice. But you can see what's on there with that. And I would do it with both hands. And I'm usually, kids will always ask me, well, how long do I do it? Do it until failure. Do it until you can't move anymore, and then stick the other hand in there and do it with that one, and then come back to your right hand or whatever your throwing hand is. J-bands, talked about those earlier. Yoga. I didn't put any yoga exercises in there. The reality is, especially with COVID going on, you can't surf the internet without tripping over a yoga program. So they're everywhere. And it doesn't, pick 4 or 5 basic exercises and that are just traditional basic yoga exercises, tree, warrior pose, some of those, and you're going to be fine. And then dry mechanics work. This is probably the most critical thing. If a kid is serious about pitching, they're going to do dry mechanics work. Every major league pitcher does it. Every professional pitcher does it. It is a staple in development. And the reason being, I only have so many bullets in the gun. I can only pitch off a mound to a catcher so many times, but I can get on a mound and I can go dry without any risk of hurting myself, without any risk of using up bullets. And with the younger kids, what I do with the, like when I'm talking 12 and under, I think it's a waste of time having little kids throw to hitters in practice. I want them doing their work in a bullpen or dry. But if I take an 11-year-old and I send them down on the warning track and I say, you're going down there every day, part of practice, each of my kids that I'm turning into a pitcher, you're going down there and you're pitching, I'm telling them, you've got the 3 kids in our league that you want to strike out the most, and you got to get through 1 inning with them. Go down there. And I want it to look like it would in a game. You just have to get 3 kids out and go down there. I'm doing 2 things with that. One, I'm creating intent with what they're doing. They're using their imagination, and they have great imaginations. They're imagining pitching and getting kids out because they're there by themselves. The other thing is, the day that you put them on the mound and they have to face one of those kids, as a coach, you can absolutely look them in the eye and say, this is the moment you've been waiting for because you've got this kid out 17 times already this year. And that kid only needs confidence for 3 pitches. And that works with high school guys too, but just when you're younger, your imagination is just so much more defined. It will work with kids that way. And them getting intent work in on their own that way. And then the reality is, like I said, professional pitchers are using dry mechanics all the time. So, okay, let's stop there for a second. Do we have questions from people in the chat or people that I can see?
I guess I'd be curious on the use of like plyo balls or the driveline programming.
That's the one I was waiting for. So overload or underload training. So I've been doing overload training and underload training with my athletes for about 30 years, with my pitchers for about 30 years. Every single guy in our program is assigned a ball that weighs about 1.5 pounds. It looks like a little mini cannonball, and every single one of them is assigned that ball, and we use it in our throwing every single day. Every day. Like, we start off our throwing routine. What you saw there, that routine's done twice, up to the point of moving your feet. They use their heavy ball up to the point of moving their feet. Then they start the routine over with a normal ball every day. That ball's too heavy for non-college athletes. I can tell you that right now. Not because they can't handle it, because this is the interesting thing. The baseball's an arbitrary weight. The only reason it feels different is because it's supposed to feel different. Like, if we played baseball with a 2-pound ball and we never knew any different, that's what we would play baseball with. And we throw it fine and we do everything else fine. But that's not what we do. We play baseball with a 9-ounce ball. Okay, so it's, so keeping that in mind. We use underload. I use wiffle balls. I sent you a long toss program. John's familiar with it. I have a winter long toss program that I utilize. I started actually, that's how I got to know Alan Yeager. Alan was on the talking thing, doing his band stuff, and I was happened to be doing rehab stuff with some pro guys that lived in our area, and it rained all the time there, so we couldn't get out in long toss when they were ready. So we created an indoor program using a series of wiffle balls, waterlogged baseballs, and normal baseballs into a net that they could throw with and build their arm strength back up. So we've done that forever. Now here's where the but comes in. So right now, we've got a number of people that are doing heavy ball stuff out there that you can buy on the internet. Okay. Some are super good at what they do. And some are like, I'm piggybacking on those super good and selling these products. If your athletes if they don't have the physical strength in the right places to be using heavy balls, they're going to get hurt. How do you know that? How do you know what they're physically capable of handling? If you put a wiffle ball in a kid's hand and he throws a wiffle ball a certain way, if it looks fluid and even remotely athletic, and you put a baseball or a ball heavier than that in his hand, and he starts looking like he's tensing up and he's muscling the ball, he's not strong enough to do a heavy ball program. He's going to compromise his mechanics. And unfortunately, when we look at a lot of the programs out there, you can buy stages of the programs. But the reality is, if there's 8 steps to a program, you're going to have to be patient enough to take a person through 8 steps to that program and buy all of those programs. There is no shortcut to it. The shortcut's going to lead to an injury. And so that's the part that worries me. You know, well, name a heavy ball program out there right now. What's the biggest one?
I mean, Driveline is the one I'm.
Absolutely. Okay. Driveline's the best, and they've got the most science behind it. They've done the research. Okay. But the reality is they'll sell you any step of their program. They won't force you to buy the whole thing because they're still trying to make money at the end. Now, if you walked into a Driveline facility or you became trained as a Driveline instructor, there's no way in hell you'd get away with jumping to step 5. They would chase you out of the building with pitchforks because they know that's setting somebody up for injury. It's looking at those programs and understanding that weighted balls aren't bad. Light balls aren't bad. There's actually a higher injury risk using a light ball than a heavy ball. Side note. The weight isn't bad. It's just, I wouldn't take a kid and say, go do a Driveline program without supervision. And if you go to Seattle and you go to Driveline where their home office is, they will not allow a client, professional or amateur, into the building without a coach overseeing them. That tells us something right there. So Kevin Bauer goes into a Driveline facility to work out. There's a Driveline coach with eyes on him to make sure he's doing everything correctly. Because if he doesn't, he runs the risk of hurting himself. Because I can't ask you to do the most violent action and say, now we're going to add weight and I want you to push it even more. Forget that you have brakes and do it even more explosive without somebody watching you. That'd be like telling you to go in and do deadlift or squat and put as much weight on and be as explosive as you can without a spotter. It wouldn't work. So that's the piece you have to be careful of. I think I tell everybody that if you're going to implement a heavy ball program, you have to be willing to babysit. And you have to pay attention. You have to believe your eyes. If the kids' mechanics are changing, this is no different than you sitting in the dugout, right, Lucas? If you're sitting in dugout and your pitcher's out there and you see the elbow start to drop, you start to see things that you don't normally see when he's throwing on the mound, you're not waiting. It's time to get that kid out of there. He's about to hurt himself. Same thing. If you see that he's changing the way he throws, you get him out of there. I have found that even with my guys, when I first get them into our program, there's times when, I mean, right now we get inundated on the internet. You know, I got a kid that transferred here from lacrosse and a really good player, played in the Northwoods League last summer. And, you know, he came in, he wants to pitch and he wants to increase velocity. And he hadn't been in our program. He hadn't been in our throwing program yet. He heard me. He came here to develop. But through the winter, he decided to do the Driveline stuff. And I came up to him and I said, Peyton, if you're doing our stuff and you're doing Driveline, you're asking for problems. If you want to mesh the two of them together and figure that out, we can. But you need eyes on you the whole time. What we do is designed so that you don't need eyes on you in the winter. We came in February 1, practice started. They'd already been throwing off the mound. We had a 50 pitch flat pen. They got a feel, and then we jumped up on the mound and we were ready to go 50 pitch pens to hitters. And again, they had already gotten a couple in on their own, but it was time for him to turn it up now. Now it was for real. There's a hitter standing in. It's time to turn it up. Okay. He went 50 pitch pen to being shut down for 10 days. Shoulder impingement. We had to increase his mobility again. Fortunately, worked really hard at it. We got him back. But that was an example. He didn't hurt himself, but what he ended up doing is he is a very long-armed kid, and the driveline stuff does a lot of short, compact movements. By not doing the entire program, he took his long arm motion and he crammed it into a short motion. And when he got on the mound, when he had to hump up, he went right to that short motion. Remember what I said about the front side? Front side's out here. Front side wants the back side to do that. Backside saying, you've been training this all winter long. And it created shoulder impingement. We had to do some work on. So I just use that as an example. Weighted ball programs aren't bad. The weight is arbitrary. But what you want to look at as a coach is the kid changing his mechanics. If he can't be free and fluid and athletic, then I got to get him back down closer to baseball weight. And remember, you can add weight to a baseball. I can take electrician's tape and add a quarter to a baseball and tape it on without changing anything. I don't have to jump from 9 ounces to 15 ounces. So, other questions?
Yeah, Coach, can you talk about recovery post game? Let's say, I know you mentioned you're not a fan of pitch counts, but we certainly have them in the high school.
You have them, and you should. Yep.
And we have to follow them.
Yep.
But does the post pitching cool down / recovery, can you talk about what you expect your pitchers to do after the game?
Yep.
And you got all these traditional things that we do, but I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
So for our pitchers, the routine's the same for all of them. They may tweak it a little bit because they have to own it, and everybody's personality is a little different. You got the guy, like my closer right now, nicest kid in the world, but he's the guy when it's time for him to go down to the bullpen, everybody stays away, he turns into instant red ass. He's that way until literally we get on the bus. Like, he gets into that mode and you just don't want to be around him, and it works for him, so we leave him alone. Other guys, I've got one of our top 3 guys, he's like just the most laid back guy in the world and nothing phases him, water off a duck's back. So everybody's going to tweak things a little different, but our basic routine is they get done pitching. If they're not hitting, because I do have a couple of those, if they're not in the DH spot, then they would start this process. If they're in the DH spot, this process wouldn't start until the game's over. Immediately, I want them thinking about what went well and what went poorly. Some guys are good at that and will do it. Some guys have to wait. Again, that's some of the stuff they'll tweak. But what they're going to at some point do is all my pitchers have a journal, and they're going to journal their day. They're going to think back on the day. What did I do in my routine? How did I feel? They're going to make notes about the hitters they faced. They're going to make notes about what they struggled. And then they're going to make notes about what they want to work on the next week or the next couple practices. Because the way we do our practices, John knows this, my practice plans go out ahead of time so that guys can look at them. They see my goals, but they set their goals as well. And they need to come out of practice better baseball players by owning that practice. And if they can't set goals, in my philosophy, and I've been this way when I coached high school too, I can't ask them to own it if they don't have any ownership in setting goals for themselves in practice. So they're going to set that in their journal. What do they want to get better at in the next few practices? And then they're going to talk to me about that either post game or on the bus ride home. We're going to talk about what do you want to work on? What went well? What didn't go well? And they'll go back to those notes in our next scouting reports and stuff as well. So that's one piece. The other piece is they're going to get some sprint work in. So, and this is all prescribed. We actually have a prescribed workout for them that's in our playbook. They're going to get, and this is going to usually happen after the game. They're going to get approximately 5 to 6 90-foot sprints, like 90 feet out, jog back. 90 feet out, jog back. Then they're going to go through a static stretch routine. They're always going to do their J-band routines, arm strengthening. Again, we want to put everything back in that we took out of it. So we want to tighten everything back up. So a lot of those things you saw there, they're going to do. Some guys will ice, other guys won't. We spend a lot of time explaining to guys the purpose of ice. And I think that's important because I don't want guys icing just because they think they're supposed to ice or they think ice is cool, because ice can actually prevent me from recovering. And a lot of people don't realize that. If I ice after I throw, before I throw within a 24-hour period, I have to flush out all that blood, which means my heart rate has to be up about 120 beats for a period of time, because that blood has, the whole idea of icing is to slow the blood down and get it to stay. Well, we know what else stays when that blood stays there. Lactic acid. Lactic acid creates soreness. Okay, I don't want my pitchers sore. We're trying to get rid of the soreness. So for a pitcher that ices, they need to understand you're pooling blood wherever you ice, and therefore you're pooling lactic acid. You have to, at some point in the next 24 hours, flush that blood out of there. You need to get on an exercise bike in the morning. You need to run sprints. You need to do something to get your heart rate going so fast that you feel the blood pulsating in your fingertips to know that you've got that lactic acid out of your body. Otherwise, you're coming to practice sore, and you're not going to want to throw, and you're confusing soreness, lactic soreness, like we talked about from squatting, with pain or soreness from throwing, and those are two very different things. If my pitcher is sore from throwing, he's hurt himself, I need him to diagnose that and not confuse it with being sore from lactic acid buildup. Those are two very different sorenesses, and 18, go down, but 18 to 22-year-olds don't know that if I don't walk them through it. The other thing, some guys are allergic to ice, believe it or not. I've coached 5 players before that icing causes the skin to swell up, causes the actual epidermal tissue to swell up really bad, and causes them to get really stiff in their skin. And that usually takes anywhere from 2 to 3 days for that to go away. So if I have one of those guys, I don't want him icing. We're going to figure out some other ways for recovery for him. Might just be cold water at the end of a shower. Because again, all I want to do is slow the blood down for that area so I get more oxygen to stay there for a little bit of time, and then get that lactic acid to pull all that, get pulled out. And so some guys will ice. We have 2 ways that guys ice. Some guys will ice with bags. So it sits on there no more than 20 minutes. Usually it's closer to 15 that they'll go with it. And that becomes part of their recovery process. If they are going to ice, we want them to ice as close to the time they worked as possible. So I don't want them, you won't see one of my pitchers pitch. He had a bad outing. He only went 3 innings. He went 3 innings. He came out of the game, and he didn't start his post-throwing routine until after the game. You won't see those guys ice. It's too late at that point. It's the same as eating to recover after you work out. You've got a small window where your body will take the protein. You have a small window where icing still is effective for that throwing athlete. And so if we're outside that window, it's not going to work as well. Now we can heat the body back up and then ice, but most kids aren't looking to do that. The other form of ice that we use is cupping. And so we take it just like a Dixie cup or a paper cup, put water in it, we freeze it, and they go right to the spot and they ice massage. So they're really digging in to the area. And this one tends to work better with elbows and forearms and biceps for guys. And so they're really going to dig in and get after it. The difference is they're icing for half the time because they will burn the skin. When you ice massage, you're getting in there a lot more, and you can do some serious tissue damage if you were to ice for 20 minutes or so. You'll actually get a 3rd-degree burn from the ice. So we want to shorten them down to no more than 10 minutes, about 8 minutes of good ice massage therapy. I prefer ice massage therapy. Unfortunately, like on the road, that doesn't work real great. We can do it usually at home, but typically the bag is the easiest, and so that's what they go to. Then from there, they're going to do their sprints, etc. We run our guys on a 4-day rotation. So we have day 1, day 2, day 3, and day 4. Day 1 is a pitching day for them. And I'm going to talk about starters. Day 1 is a pitching day for them. Day 2 is a conditioning day for them. We're going to beat the hell out of them on day 2 and expect them to practice. Okay. So day 2 for our guys is about 40 to 45 minutes of intense ballistic conditioning. They're doing mobility work in between things. It's a lot of plyos, it's a lot of jumping, a lot of sprinting, a lot of explosive work. We have 25-pound med balls that they utilize. But we're 45 minutes, they don't want to move. And we're going to kill them for 45 minutes. We're going to give them a few minutes to rest, or depending on if we're inside or outside for practice, we might practice first with them and then they'll go to day 2, or we may put them into a day 2 routine and then ask them to do some practice stuff. But the idea with the day 2 is we are assuming that the entire body is full of lactic acid at this point from the work they did. And so we're going to just blow it out, and we're going to cause all the big muscles to really start working and firing. I'm a firm believer also that the day after a pitcher throws is the best day for them to increase their mechanics and their body awareness. When we're a little bit tired and we focus, we pitch with intent, I can get a lot more work done. I get my best work done with my pitchers the day after they throw in a dry session with them when I'm working one-on-one with them. They have the most feel for their body, because when they do things wrong, that little bit of tired and soreness really barks at them when they're inefficient. So I find it real effective for me to be down in the pen doing dry work or short work with them. They're allowed to throw. The vast majority of our guys throw on their day 2. Some will, like I had mentioned earlier, some will throw long toss on day 2. Some will throw short. They all are going to do some kind of throwing, dry throwing, light throwing, some kind of throwing on day 2. It's very intentional. They're very focused. If they're talking to their partner, that is the one time. I don't like talking during throwing, but if there is any talking, anything I think is distracting on a day 2 throwing session for a pitcher, it turns into a track session. They know that that is when they have to absolutely be in tune with their body, and everything else is blocked out. And you'll see that with our pitchers. Everybody, you know who's on day 2 because everybody avoids them, because that is their day where they are just completely have to be about their body. So they might throw out, they're going to do band work, they're going to do arm strengthening work. We have a series of different exercises that way. Day 3, now we're ramping it back up. So day 3, we're trying to get the feel back for pitching. And so we're doing everything inside of 50 feet. We're doing flat work. We're getting a feel for the breaking ball. Day 3 is a heavy breaking ball day for our guys, because breaking balls and changeups are feel pitches. So we want them to start getting the feel for those pitches and getting their fingers to work. So we'll go 45 feet, 50 feet, throwing to a partner, and I'm trying to feel, I'm working on my hand-eye coordination. We don't throw over the plate. We'll throw curveballs and changeups right over the middle of the plate, but all of our fastballs are done in the left-handed box or the right-handed box, head high or ankle high, because I want to feel the extremes of moving the ball on a day 3. I'm not worried about locating perfect. I want to feel, what does it feel like to take it all the way across the arm side from my right hand to the left-handed box? What do I want it to feel like to throw to the arm side in on the inner half? How do I feel the baseball that way? And most of that work is done out of the stretch. Again, we're keeping it simple for them. I do have some guys that like to get on the mound and do some of their day 3 work. That's fine. But the vast majority do it flat. It's usually flat work. Day 4, now I'm starting to build into getting ready to pitch. So day 4 is a bullpen day. So day 4, I'm getting on the mound now, and I'm preparing myself for competition. And so I'm at 60 feet. I have some pitchers that'll start at 50 feet off the mound. They might start with some breaking balls. We do some back work mount, work off the back of the mound to work on extension. We have a program where they work themselves up to the mound. But essentially, they're getting on the mound now, and they're throwing. they'll almost always have a hitter or a dummy standing in. And they are working on whatever they want to work on. But the end of their bullpen session, they are going to throw at least two sequences to hitters. So we teach sequencing in our scouting reports. We have 4 pitch sequences we utilize. We have what are called hitters that are a 1 sequence hitter, a 2 sequence hitter, a 3 sequence hitter, 4 sequence hitter, and a 5 sequence hitter. So my pitcher on a day 4, he might say, I want to work a sequence 1 guy and a sequence 2 guy. My catcher, knowing my pitcher, knows what that means. And so he's throwing down signs in the bullpen to work through a 4-pitch sequence to those guys, and he's executing that sequence. And then he's done. When he's done with his bullpen session, and again, we do about 75% of our bullpen work is done out of the stretch as well. We only do about 25% of our work out of the windup. Reason being, your most high leverage pitches come out of the stretch. I need you the most comfortable out of the stretch. And we're done with our bullpen session. Then they do a handful of sprints. They do some core work, a core routine, J-bands, arm circles, Mansolinos, which is an arm exercise we do. Let's see, they're going to do some mobility work, a handful of different mobility exercises. And then they're going to review their notebook. So they go back into their journal. They're going to set some goals for tomorrow based on our scouting reports. And then most all of our pitchers then they'll meditate. And that's something that we've been implementing. I've always done it, but I've never enforced it. But it's something that we now enforce, and almost across the board, our pitchers will end that day 4 session sitting in the bullpen, focusing on their breath and spending about 5 to 10 minutes. I do allow them to have headphones. The 2 times they're allowed to have headphones in our program are day 4 work when they're meditating, and pregame work when we're hitting BP or they're doing dry work in the bullpen. They're allowed to shag with headphones on, and then they take them off when they go into the bullpen. But when they go to meditate, they can have music at that time if they want to. Then we go into their game routine. For relievers or guys that pitch and play a position, that routine is not going to work, right? So we have to change that up. So we have some rules with that. If you make a relief appearance and you're asked to get up in the bullpen 3 times or more, the next day has to be a day 2. Because you've essentially accumulated 50 to 60 pitches in the bullpen while you've warmed up. So we got to get your body ready for the next day. So as a coach, I have to be aware of that. When I get a guy up for the 3rd time, I know that if I don't use him today, I've lost him for a few days. So that's one of the rules. If he goes into a game and his pitch count climbs above 40 pitches, he's going into a day 2 the next day. Okay. And if he's a dual-way guy, we have a couple of those. I had mentioned that before. If he's a 2-way guy and today he's pitching and he's, he does whatever he does, but he's got a day 2 the next day. But let's say it's Joey Collifoot, kid we have from Columbus. So he would be a right fielder for us when he's not pitching. I would have to make a decision. He's either going to DH for us or he's going to play in right field. Either way, he will be getting his day 2 in the next day, and he knows that. So at some point, he's got to clean that out. Now, what many of my guys will do is if we're playing an evening game, they're going to do what most professionals do. If we're playing an evening game, they're going to get up early in the morning. They're going to get their day 2 done in the morning, hit the protein and the recovery food and drinks fast, get a nap in, recover, and then play the game. If we're playing a noon game or we're early in the morning, they're going to put that day 2 off till the end of that game, that second day, and get that in then. But they're going to get it in. Even if it means the bus leaves late that day, they're getting that in. Everybody knows we're just hanging out waiting. So it's 45 minutes. So that's how we would do it that way.
That was great. Thank you.
Welcome.
Coach, we do have Coach Detman sent text to the group. Said had to go, but thought you might want to ask Al how to balance family life with the baseball passion. How do you pull that off?
Who just typed in there they love Mansolinos? Is that you, John? I do too, John. I do too. Marry the right person, right? I mean, I don't know what else to say, right? That's what it is. I mean, it's, yeah, I mean, that's it. It's marrying the right person. You know, Michelle is awesome. We're actually coming up on 28 years here in 2 weeks. And she knew what she married. You know, she married a baseball coach. She married a teacher. It helps. She was a coach. She played sports, so that helps a lot. She gets it that way. And then, you know, the other piece is, and John, you know this, I don't have to tell you, I mean, our players are part of our family. And when you get that, you know, when you get that piece of it, then there's not a disconnect between what you're doing in your family's life. That your players become an extension of that family. They become, you know, my daughter's got red hair. John has red hair. It was obvious, right? Oh, John Adair. She'll never forget John Adair. When she was little, that was a redheaded guy that played on the team. She has red hair. That's the connection. You know, he's a big brother that way. And so that helps there. And then I think the biggest thing is, and this is going to sound corny, but I believe it, and I believed it forever. Otherwise, I wouldn't use it at the end of all my emails, and everything we do is in our program. We use the phrase win today. It's something I've used forever. I really need to get it coined so I make money off it. But it's the WIN is what's important now. And the win today is simply a reminder. When I wake up in the morning, I have a choice to be better or worse than yesterday. I don't have to be great at everything, but I need to pick one thing that I'm going to be better than the rest of the world at. I got to go to bed at night knowing there's one thing that I'm better than everybody else in the world at. And it doesn't, you know, we do this with our guys, our first week with our freshmen here on campus. We challenge them with wins. Oh, there you go, right there, John. We challenge them with wins. And they don't ever know what I'm challenging them. I started doing this a couple years ago, but we'll have guys come in and I might have one roommate where the challenge for him is he needs to brush his teeth every day for the next month better than his roommate, longer than his roommate. And he doesn't know that I told his roommate that every day he has to make his bed like he's in the Army, and I send him a video. And it's funny how their confidence level goes up each day in 30 days when they're like, their roommate didn't know, but they know that, dude, why are you making your bed every freaking morning? I feel like a slob because you're doing that. The confidence he gains from that, the guy making his bed, and then to be able to bring him back together and go, so what happened with you guys? I don't know. His teeth are super freaking clean and I feel like a slob. And that guy's like, and I feel pretty good about myself. And I don't know why he makes his bed every day like that. So just that idea of that, but more importantly, to the balance piece is the what's important now. I put in long days, and my family knows that. Okay, and there's plenty of days like right now. You know, I'll get home whatever time I'll get home tonight. When I pull into the driveway, I have two choices. I walk through the door, and that's everything in my life, or I'm still focused on what I just left when I pulled into the driveway. And I think it's really important that when we get home, before, in my case, before I get out of my truck, that I count to 10 and I pause and I walk through the door, and there's nothing more important in my life than my wife, my son, and my daughter, and they have no doubt about that. If I have a bad day, and we all do, that has nothing to do with them. I need to stay in my truck longer before I go in there, because what's important now is those people in front of me. And I'm not saying I can do that every time. If I had the secret sauce for that, guys, then that'd be awesome. But it's it's definitely, you know, people ask me, why is that in your email and stuff like that? It's probably more something I use all the time to remind myself that I need to be present in the moment. I need to focus on what's important right now. And the same thing with my guys. That's been the hardest thing for me being an athletic director and a baseball coach is, can I take the bullshit I deal with as an athletic director and am I going to leave it in my office or do I take it to the field? Because my baseball players don't care. They didn't have anything to do with it. They need me 100% invested in them. They need me so in tune that when they're just slightly off, they need me to know that they're just slightly off. And if my brain's not there 100%, I'm not going to pick up on that. And I may not get that opportunity again. And so it's something I think it's easy to say. It's incredibly hard to do, but we have to compartmentalize on where we're at right now. And more importantly, that's a life skill that we can teach in baseball. And so if we can model it, our players can start to learn it. And maybe when they're 30 years old, they pick up on it. And maybe we're lucky, like I am sometimes, and they come back and they say, wow, I had no idea what being present in the batter's box had anything to do until my first kid was born. And now I know what you mean. That's what it is right there. So that's the answer to that one is trying to do that the best we can. Doesn't mean she's not looking forward to retirement. I'm sure she is. Or maybe not. Maybe she just likes me being away. I don't know. We'll find out. Anybody have any other questions on pitching or anything else baseball related, I guess? All right. If not, I will tell everybody this. I'm super easy to get a hold of, and I actually don't blow people off. So everything on the website, if it's on there, you can use it to get a hold of me. And so that includes my cell phone, my office phone, my email, everything comes in my pocket. If I don't hit you back right away, it's just simply because I'm not able to, but I'll get back to you as soon as I absolutely can. And I have no problem sharing stuff. So there are no secrets. I've stolen everything I've had. There's not an original thought. You know, I think we're advancing in the game of baseball a lot, which is awesome. And it's creating a cool argument about where do we have feel and where do we have statistics and how do we get all that to work together. And I think that's a great struggle for us to have. But I have no secrets. I'm happy to share anything with anybody at any time. So the other thing too, I tell people this all the time, our practices are open to the public. We have no closed practices, indoor or out. I have coaches that stop by all the time, youth ball coaches, high school coaches. So as we get into the fall and the spring, if you ever want to see what a college practice looks like, or you want to see how things look, certain drills look and stuff like that, I'm happy to send out our practice schedule to people. And I've even gone as far as people saying, hey, can I come by practice on Wednesday, coach? You practice at this time. And I've even gone as far as sent them a practice plan so they can actually see what's going on that Wednesday before they get there. So, like I said, no secrets, happy to help anybody in any way I can. So just reach out.
Well, Coach, this is great. This has been awesome. 2.5 hours flew by. I sure appreciate that. I know, and I want to thank both Lucas for kind of starting this whole Zoom thing and John for connecting with you, but I definitely want to thank you because we gained a lot of information tonight. So I appreciate that very much.
You're welcome. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I'm on like page 4 of notes, and especially the detail of some of the science behind some of the things we do in baseball was really insightful for me. Good. I'm glad. So now you can get on. I don't know if you guys are aware of this. This is really cool. Major League Baseball now has a video library for the public. Are you aware of that, Lucas? Yeah.
They've got the stat thing, and a lot of people know about the StatCast stuff, but the video, awesome for teaching. Yeah, terrific. You can pull up any major league player and find any video. Unfortunately, you also find the interviews, which sucks, but that's fine. You sort through those. But yeah, it's really good for teaching. So All right, everyone. Well, have a great night, and we will have baseball again. I don't know if we'll have it at the major league level because they don't seem to be able to figure this whole thing out. They don't seem to understand that, hey, you know, we got a captive audience right now. Oh, baseball. Yep. Baseball Savant is awesome. So now if you go MLB video,
Oh, okay.
there is they literally a video library of all Major League Baseball players. I can send you the link. Yeah, there you go. MLB video games.
Right. Yeah, that's not what
Have it. Because I've got it marked on my computer.
I'm sure I can probably find it.
No, I think it was up. Right there. MLB Network videos. I think that might be it. Maybe not. That might be MLB Networks. That's MLB Networks. I'll send you the link, Lucas.
Awesome.
But you can literally type in the player's name and it just pulls up every video, and it goes back to like the video they've had forever.
I think that was that first one on the list. If you go back to your search page, Lucas,
Okay.
I think it was the very first one. Because
I
it said
think
coverage includes audio, video clips, interviews. Like,
Yep. Everything's draft right now. Yeah, if you go up to the video. Live games, condensed. I'll send you the link, Lucas.
Okay. Sounds good.
I've got it saved on my computer. I'll send it as soon as we get off the call here because I'm on my computer. But yeah, I mean, that kind of stuff has just helped so much in teaching because now all of a sudden you just have access to stuff we just didn't have before. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
thank you very much.
Good to see you, Coach.
You too, John. Say hi to the fam.
I will.
Thank you.
John actually figured out how to get on here.
He
Yeah. I needed to do an update on Zoom on the computer, and this Mac is like 12 years old already, so it's limping on one leg already. So.
But you got it. You made it work.
Yeah, I got it. I had it on my phone for a while, and then I finally the web page finally decided to